Hey, welcome to another video from Counselor Tips. Thanks for joining me today on this video that is about change talk related to motivational interviewing. Now, this is a pretty hefty and lengthy video because I'm going to provide a lot of examples for a lot of different ways that you can implement change talk. So hang in there with me as I don't only cover what change talk is and how it actually helps us deal with resistance in clients, but also then hang in there because, well, we're going to cover a lot of suggestions for you. So bookmark this video, use it, reuse it, however you can to help clients, especially when you're using motivational interviewing. Change talk is one of the techniques that is used to work with clients in any stage of change. Now, I've covered the stages of changes in a completely different and separate video here on the Counselor Tip channel. If you're interested in knowing more about the stages of change, please see that video. Try to remember that the core skills that we've been taught as a counselor aren't going to necessarily magically bring about some change in a client, especially with regards to using motivational interviewing. Change is a process where you as the counselor can listen for differences from the client between sustained talk and change talk. It is the ratio of change talk to sustained talk that is the predictor of change actually happening. There are strategies that you can use with a client that can accentuate change talk and help minimize sustained talk. Change talk is the desire to get credit for trying, the client implying a desire for someone to help them. It is a reason for things to be different so the client has a different outcome. It is a reason for things to change so things are more doable and stress is reduced. It is the need for a person to be productive in their own life. It is the need for things to change so the others are not thinking the client needs to improve. So here are some strategies to elicit and strengthen change talk in clients. We're going to find out first how important change is to the client through scaling, also known in motivational interviewing as the importance ruler. Scaling questions are non-threatening, and they're helpful for the counselor to assess the client's readiness for change. We will focus on the client's desire, ability, reason, and need for change. So an example of a scaling or the readiness ruler would be something like this. On a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 means not at all important and 10 means the most important thing for me right now, how important would you say it is for you to, and fill in the blank? The answer to this question can be valuable, but what's more valuable is to follow up with the client by the use of an open-ended question. And tell me about being at a, fill in the number, and not a 0 or a lower number. We want to note the subtle difference in how we ask the scaling question. So look at the difference in the format. Why are you at a 6 and not at a 10? The answer to the latter question is sustained talk. Whereas if we ask the question, why are you at a 6 and not a 0, is that it is likely to evoke change talk and the reason that the change is important to the client. A pitfall to avoid when using the readiness ruler or scaling would be if you ask a question like this. On a scale from 0 to 10, how ready are you to change? Asking about readiness is too broad and can feel overwhelming to a client. We want to be as specific as possible. A key about scaling questions or readiness ruler is to make sure that you're asking these questions about the client's desire, ability, and need. Query extremes. We want to consider situations where the client may have little to no desire to change. One way to elicit change talk in a client is to get the client to describe the extremes of their concerns, or to imagine the extreme concerns of their continued behavior. So here are some examples. What concerns you most about being on probation? Suppose you continue on as you have been without changing. What do you imagine are the worst things to happen? How much do you know about the continuing use of alcohol, even if you plan to try and manage your drinking? One easy way to identify change talk is to listen to how clients talk about the idea of change. When a client mentions change, it is our job as the listening counselor to land on that change talk. In order to really intently listen and land on change talk, we want to use the technique of darn C. That's right, DARN-C. So the D in darn C stands for desire. A client wanting is one component of the motivation to change. While it's certainly helpful to have desire, it's not required. People can change even if they don't want to. We want to listen for why clients would want to make that change. It is also possible to elicit change talk by approaching the extreme from an opposite position, by focusing on what could be best by discontinuing a behavior. Here are some examples. What would be the best result if you did make that change? What would be the best result if you did make that change? If you were completely successful in making the change you wanted, how would things be different for you? We can also help a client look backwards. When a time was good and no problems emerged. Using looking back is intended to highlight the discrepancy of how things were in the past to how they are in the present, with the optimistic approach that life could get better. There's also looking forward. We can help clients by getting them to develop change talk as a way to develop hope and get them to imagine that they can change their future. Here are some examples. If a miracle were to happen when you went to sleep tonight and you woke up to a life you would prefer, what would be different? Tell me how you would like things to be for you in 5 years from now. If you were to take a week off from using drugs, what would you do first? You have identified as your goal. What does making this change mean in reaching that goal? Remember, change talk has a desire component. It's a desire to get credit for trying. It implies the clients have a desire for someone to help them. Here are some examples of questions you can use with clients to elicit that desire. How badly do you want that? What are some of the things that make you want to change? How would you feel differently when you are no longer, and then insert the behavior? What would make you want this change? What will you have or get that you want when you make this change? How long have you wanted to make this change? Remember, we are eliciting the client to develop change talk. We're also doing this by recognizing the A in the darn C. A stands for the client's ability. So the ability part, we're helping the client discover their belief and their ability to make change. Here are some examples of questions that you could use that elicit change talk in a client. What skill, knowledge, or ability do you have that you would use? What would it take for you to do that or to stop doing that? Who could support you in doing this? Who could you learn from in order to make this happen? What skills do you think you may need to make this happen? What do you actually need to stay away from to bring about this change? Another way to elicit change talk in clients in the darn C model is the R, which means reason. Reason is the why. It could be reasons why to change or reasons against change. Listen for specifics coming from the client and their reasons that they want to or not want to change. Change talk is the reason people want to change, so they no longer feel that there's a problem, or others will identify them as the problem. Remember, the reason for things changing would be so that they're more achievable or doable, and that stress is ultimately reduced. Here are some examples that you can use in questions to elicit change talk that can evoke the client thinking about the reasons for change. What are the reasons you have told yourself about making this change? What relationships might you damage or lose if you don't change? In what way will you feel differently about yourself in making this change? Who matters to you that will feel or think differently about you when you change this behavior? Who will be negatively affected if you don't change this behavior? What will you notice first in making this change? The fourth component in the technique of darn C in eliciting change talk in clients is the N, which is the need. When clients can identify the need to change, it provides a punctuation of importancy or even urgency in the need to change. We want to make sure that we're listening to the value of importance to change. And in this part is where we can highlight the client's need. Change talk is the need to be seen as a person who is not imposing themselves or the things in their life on others. Change talk is the need for things to be different, so the client does not think that others believe they need to improve. Here are some examples of using questions to elicit change talk in clients, highlighting the need. What have others told you is one of the needs for you to make this change? What are you at risk of losing if you do not change? And name the behavior. What have the costs been in continuing? Name the behavior. What has been damaged in your life with, and then name the behavior. How will changing, name the behavior, heal or repair that damage? The first four stages of change talk, the D, A, R, N, are considered the preparatory phase of change talk because none of them alone mean that change is going to happen. So our job is to help clients move from preparatory talk into mobilizing talk. We want to elicit and get a commitment from a client to change. And lastly, in the darn C is the C. And C in this model is representing the word commitment. When we are looking to elicit change talk in a client, we want to listen for the client's language that leans towards or alludes to the fact that they're ready to commit or taking steps towards change. We want to listen for specifics in what clients would do. Preparatory talk is very different than mobilized talk. So some things that we would hear that would be preparatory talk would be, I want to, I could, I need to, I have good reason to. Mobilizing talk or a change talk where a client has demonstrated that they're ready to make some kind of change more appears like this. I will, I am going to, I will do it, I am committed to. Some questions that we can use to elicit change talk to get a client to move towards more committed type of language would be these questions. On a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low and 10 being high, how confident are you that you could change? Describe to me what that would look like. On a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low and 10 being high, how ready are you to make this change? What will you do first? What do you need to move your score higher? What would you need to happen to move from, let's say, a 1 to a 2? Help me understand why you scored in the way that you did. What steps do you have in mind, and what does your timeline look like to make this change? The process of developing a change plan actually requires a collaborative spirit and environment with the client. A change plan addresses how a client will proceed, as well as how the change will fit into their life. We're going to listen carefully to clients and how they use change talk to talk about specific actions, intentions, and implementation of ideas. When we're eliciting a change in a client, it requires a client to set goals, for a client to consider change options, arriving at a plan, and eliciting the client's commitment. We want to use the technique of ORS, which is covered in a separate Counselor Tips video. Please see that in Communication Styles and Motivational Interviewing. And this is an excellent opportunity to work with clients in setting up SMART goals. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. These are covered in the Counselor Tips video on treatment planning. For many clients, exploring options to achieve desirable outcomes is a new process. Oftentimes, their trip to try and meet their goal has been met with failure before. Important in this stage is to get a client to brainstorm as many ideas and develop a menu of options. So it really belongs to the client to develop a full array of options for themselves in order to thwart off an additional failure. Then we are arriving at a plan. The key here is to make sure the client gets as specific and away from being general as much as possible. There's nothing that underlies a complete failure more than someone being absolutely general. How about, one day, I just can't wait to be happy. Well, what is one day, and how does a person measure their happiness? What does that even look like? When a person builds a plan and is as specific as possible with multiple options, this helps them build self-efficacy. We want to provide a client with an opportunity not only to state their intentions, but also to write them down. Remember, when we're moving from general to specific, and it's a new way of thinking, sometimes it feels overwhelming and we lose track of all the options we've identified. So when a client writes it down, it's tremendously beneficial to them. Next is eliciting commitment. Well, taking ownership of a plan and voicing commitment can feel kind of threatening to some clients and overwhelming to others. It's important to remember your position as a counselor is to help the client not only develop as many options as possible, but also help a client review and evaluate what has worked before and what might be working for them now. If a client appears to be non-committal or ambivalent, remember that ambivalence is the core to making a change. So hang in there with them and see the separate video on rolling with resistance in Counselor Tips. So here is a simple change plan that you can use with clients. So whether they write it in a journal, you write it on your whiteboard, or they put it in a notebook, have them complete these statements. The most important reasons I want to make this change are: my main goals for myself in making this change are, I plan to do these specific things in order to accomplish my goals. Have them write sections. The first one is specific action, which is the when. Other people could help me with this change in these ways. The next section, possible ways to help. These are some possible obstacles to change and ways I could handle them. And lastly, possible obstacles and how I could respond. I know my plan is working when I see these results. So there's been a lot to digest in this video about change talk, and change talk is frequently subtle. And with a counselor who has used motivational interviewing for some time, it's just a natural part of their conversation in using the darn seed to elicit change talk in a client and to help a client get specific and make a plan and develop SMART goals, and to help them continue to look at what's working and remain engaged in motivation to continue to make change. It is just something that happens over a course of time. But I encourage you to review this video repeated times. That way, when you are using darn see for the first time, the 5th time, the 25th time, or the 55th time, that it just becomes a part of your repertoire while using motivational interviewing. Thanks for joining me for this video. I certainly hope that you found it to be supportive and helpful. If you find that you're learning from Counselor Tips, please consider subscribing to this channel and share this channel with others. That way they can find useful tips for themselves too. I'll see you soon.